Jovan, Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another Lakers postgame reaction show. Just got back from the Spectrum Center here in Charlotte, where the Lakers won 112-107 to improve to 2-0 on this Grammy trip and 26-18 overall. They are now 8 games above 500, a season high for this group. They have won 6 of 7 games and continue to make a push to try and get into a spot with home court advantage in the Western Conference. Shout out to everyone in the chat. Just Chillin', Rob Hader, Choco Thunder, Mixelplix, is a zombie, Tony, Chris, Deonta. Shout out to everyone in the chat right now. Big Baby Sports, Sam. So we got a lot to touch on. I will note that it is the front end of a back-to-back, and I have a crazy travel day tomorrow to try to get to Philadelphia from Charlotte. I am a Delta loyalist, and this is not a great Delta trip. So I am flying backwards to go to Atlanta and then flying from Atlanta to Philly. And I just say all that to say I'm going to try and keep this as close to an hour as possible. I'm going to try to zoom through the 3 takeaways, overarching takeaway, and stat of the night, and then get into your questions, and then we'll get out of here at about the hour mark. So I just wanted to give you guys that one up front. I will be back, obviously, tomorrow night in Philly for the second night of the back-to-back. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. All right, so overarching takeaway for me was an uninspiring win from the Lakers, but a win nonetheless. They had a dominant start, an incredible start. I believe it was at one point something like 26-5, and they just had a maybe even a bigger lead in the first quarter, but an incredible first quarter, like one of the best quarters the Lakers have played this season. And of course, Anthony Davis was a huge part of that, had 21 points and 11 rebounds, just like outscored Charlotte. I'm going to touch on AD, of course, with one of my bigger takeaways, but outscored Charlotte by himself, out-rebounded them by himself. He outscored them 21-19 in the first quarter, out-rebounded them 11-9, had more blocks than them, had more field goals than them. So just AD by himself outplayed the entire Charlotte rotation in that first quarter. So AD gets off to the incredible start, scores 21 of LA's 39. They're up 39-19 at the end of the first. And then from that point of the game on, it was the return of the unseriousness. And I will say, like, I felt like the Lakers were playing hard, and they certainly missed. This was a game where you felt the compounding, like we've talked about it before, where the Lakers are not really a team that can afford to be missing key rotation guys. And they seemingly are always missing at least one or two, if not more. And I felt they didn't miss Rui as much in the Golden State game. But then you lose Gabe, who was a scratch before the game due to banging knees, which, remember, like, that was kind of how he, some of the stuff he was dealing with last year. He's a late scratch. And I think that, like, there was a compounding nature to missing Rui and Gabe, and all of a sudden you're playing Dalton more minutes, Jackson a little bit more, and then Shake gets thrown in there, and he really struggles. So I actually think, from like a competitive nature standpoint, I don't think that the Lakers, I mean, of course, anytime you go up by 20 early, you're going to have a little bit of a coasting nature, and I thought there were some stretches of that, but really, to me, it was some minutes to guys who shouldn't be playing even against a bad team. Also acclimating a guy in Vando who I thought played well overall, but certainly I think is still finding his footing. And I thought some of the the spacing concerns and sort of the not guarding Vando, I think, showed up a little bit more in this game than it did in the Golden State game. But overall, LA finds a way to hold on. Charlotte makes a couple of big pushes, one late to closing this really throughout the whole second quarter. They outscore them 32-20. Then in the second half, they go on a couple runs, including one early in the fourth where it looked like it was potentially going to swing in Charlotte's favor. But they didn't have, but the one thing that I have the biggest issue with, if I'm the Lakers, is that they did not have Brandon Miller and they did not have LaMelo Ball, who got injured early in the second quarter, was running back after a shot and stepped on Vando's foot and then sprained his ankle. He was, went straight to the locker room, didn't return. So really, this is a lottery level team that you're playing, and they don't have their two best players. That's where I say, like, this is an uninspiring win. And LeBron had an interesting comment post game where he said, like, we didn't come here to blow anybody out. We came here to win this game, and we did that. I would kind of push back and argue, like, you should be trying to blow teams out anytime you're playing. Like, maybe that kind of speaks to sometimes the wrong mentality that this group has in general sometimes. So I would say, like, you should, especially for this group with the net rating they have, the point differential they have, like, they should be trying to make up that stuff. And ultimately, it doesn't matter if you get the win. But this, to me, ended up being a harder win than it had to be. This is a script we've seen this season against bad teams where the Lakers get out to a good start and they progressively let the team back into it. And then because they had, like, some incredible shot making down the stretch from LeBron, obviously AD carried the group. And again, I will touch on him a little bit more, but it felt like this was a game that did not need to be this close. And really, it was shaping up again early on. It looked like the Lakers were about to have, like, one of their few wire to wire, just, like, dominant performances of the season. And yet again, the turnovers, the transition defense, the allowing offensive rebounds, the fouling shooters, and just, like, not smart fouls, all that stuff compounded. And then also missing Rui and Gabe into, I think, them, having the final three quarters that they ended up having. But again, they got the win. So a win, I say it every time they have an ugly win, which there's been a lot of them. Like, a win is a win. You take a win in the West, and they're right there at the number 5 spot. But it would be nice to see this team play with a little bit more seriousness for longer stretches. But again, I think they really did miss Gabe in particular, but also Rui tonight. So stat of the night to me is going to be, I really liked this post-game line from JJ Redick, where he said that Anthony Davis put in 2 nights' work because he had 21 and 11 in the first quarter, and then 21 and 12 over the final 3 quarters. So you put those two together, you get 42 points, 23 rebounds, both season highs for AD. But you could go with the 42, the 23, but I kind of like the splitting it up of just, like, he basically had 2 20-point, he did have 2 20-point doubles in the first quarter and the final 3 quarters. So just an incredible performance by AD. And he, of course, is takeaway number 1 is AD's best offensive performance of the season high 42 points, season high 23 rebounds. Really, you could say best game of the season. I think he's had some better defensive performances overall, but when you factor in the offensive end, the rebounding, 8 offensive rebounds, he really carried the Lakers tonight, as the title of tonight's stream is. Like, it was just the Lakers do not, like, team best plus 16, played 37 minutes, 17 of 28 from the floor, didn't hit his 2 3-point attempts, missed a couple free throws, but a couple of assists, a couple of blocks, struggled a little bit with turnovers on, against double teams, and sometimes AD, that happens. But I think he's been, like, for a guy who put a lot of public pressure on this organization and on the front office to respond the way he has with the performances he's had against the Celtics, against the Warriors, and then tonight against the Hornets. Like, AD has come out and completely backed up his play and the comments. And he was like, I'm going to apply this pressure, and then I'm going to dominate and make sure, I'm backing up my requests and showing you, like, I'm serious about contending with this group. Like, we're ready. We just need some reinforcements. So go out and get those. So I thought 80, again, tonight, like he had the jumper falling, he had floaters falling. Lakers did a nice job of some inverted pick and rolls and getting him on the move, getting him downhill. He just abused Mark Williams, and Mark Williams is someone that had been having something of like a breakout. He was a 20 plus double guy for the past couple weeks, and has really been having a nice season for Charlotte. Someone that honestly, if the Lakers could get in the trade market, like I don't think they could, but if they could, like he's exactly the type of guy they need. But he had no chance against Anthony Davis tonight, and really no one on Charlotte did. And really, like there was that segment in parts of the second and third where they kind of went away from him, and I feel like they kind of just, it's been a multi-year trend at this point where AD has a big first quarter, not quite to this extent. It was the first 21.11 rebound first quarter for a player since 1996, which is just a wild stat. But maybe that should have been the stat of the night. You know what? We're going to retroactively go back and make that the stat of the night. But regardless, like AD was just awesome tonight. And it felt like he hadn't been like quiet over the last few weeks, but he hadn't had like a performance like this. And I think, the Golden State game was great. Going back, the Atlanta game was great earlier in the month. So again, like AD on any given night is a walking 30 and 15 threat. But this was a game where I feel like he really carried the group in a way that if he has 32 and 16, I think they lose this game. Like they really needed every point and every rebound. So I think AD, arguably best game of the season, probably best game of the season, and just obliterated poor Mark Williams. But Mark Williams is going to be fine. Takeaway number 2 for me is the Lakers really missed Gabe Vincent. And I hinted at it in my overarching takeaway of the game. But like, I think as the point I made last show, and I stand by it, is that I feel like things have flipped where between Gabe and Rui, I think Gabe is less expendable right now than Rui is, because the Lakers have more guys that can do not quite, none of them can fill the offensive role that Rui has, not every night, but 1 out of every 3 or 4 games. Like none of these guys can replace the Rui ceiling, but in general, between DFS and Vando and even Max and LeBron, and even if they play a little bigger, they've been playing more 2 big lineups with Jackson and AD. Like you can kind of get by with that group of players in the front court. And really, if you think about, let's just say like the Lakers are, take Gabe and Rui out of it for a second. If the Lakers trade for a big man, even if they keep Rui, but let's just say, like, again, put him to the side, you have a center, AD, LeBron, DFS, Vando. Between those 5 guys, you should be able to get the 144 minutes of front court minutes, because you have LeBron and AD are going to combine for at least 70-ish minutes a night, and then you have 74 minutes for the other 3 guys, which again, I think DFS, JJ's talked about playing him 30-ish minutes a night once he's fully healthy from this calf or ankle injury, whatever that he's been dealing with. So that's already 30 of the 74, and then you have 44 minutes between Vando and whichever center the Lakers potentially acquire at the deadline. So I think Rui's spot is much more expendable compared to Gabe's spot, where frankly, when Gabe doesn't play, it's more Max, which I think is fine depending on the matchup, more Austin, which I also think is fine depending on the matchup. But then you get into the Dalton, Shake, potentially Cam Reddish minutes, and like that's where I think things get a bit shaky. Like tonight, Dalton, I thought really just like continues to be very hit or miss. Tonight was a miss night. Had 2 points in 21 minutes, just 1 for 3 from the floor. And Miles Bridges and Nick Smith and who else? Micic, like they were just all targeting Dalton, more Bridges, but they were like targeting Dalton and saying like finding Dalton, having his man come up and then attacking him off the dribble or hitting him with step backs and pull-ups and whatnot. So like Dalton just continues to be a defensive liability. And I think on the nights he's not making shots or even really taking them, which tonight, again, 3 shots in 21 minutes, let alone he only made 1 of 3, but like even 3 field goal attempts in 21 minutes is not enough for Dalton, for him to really be out there that much. Like it's just, those minutes were really rough. And then Shake, I'm officially moving my midseason grade was a D- for him because I said it was too small of a sample size. We're officially in F territory. Shake tonight, 12 minutes, 0 for 2, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 3 fouls, -6 in his 12 minutes. He's just not like, he's not been playable basically outside of like, first game was okay. Second game was like decent. And then since then he's basically been unplayable. So I think that the Lakers, like, we've kind of gotten the preview, like everyone was overreacting when it was Gabe and Rui were the 2 that were ruled out. And against Golden State, we saw, again, without Rui, they were able to be just fine. But I think tonight, partly, because Rui was out, but also I think more specifically, the backcourt minutes were really rough without Gabe. And I think that's just something to factor in of if they end up flipping Gabe for a Robert Williams, a Jonas Valanciunas, some other big in that like price range, I think they have to seriously consider finding a way, either dumping one of the minimum guys or just waiving one of the minimum guys and bringing in a better guard than Shake Milton and probably a better or more reliable player than Dalton Connect. And that might not be possible with the vet minimum market. Maybe it is, depending on how you feel about Markelle Fultz or Dennis Smith Jr. or Lonnie Walker, or whatever. But like they need I think they need another ball handler if they move Gabe. I think that has become clear throughout this process. Like he's not Miami Gabe offensively. He has been shooting the ball well and actually better than some of the Miami, but like that guy was like a bit of a spark plug. He could give you more in that different roles, right? Like there was times he was the 3rd or 4th option in Miami during that run. That's not going to be the case here in LA. But I think Gabe has become more important than Rui as things stand. And that is predicated on Vando staying healthy. And that's a variable that we don't know, of course, what that's going to look like. But I think as LA, we are officially 10 days away from the trade deadline. And as LA is making their final calls and making their final offers and really evaluating this roster, I would like if we're ranking the guys in terms of like guys I'd want to keep to guys I'd want to trade, I used to have Rui above Gabe, and I think I flipped that recently. And a big part of that is Vando coming back when he did. But I think DFS has looked better and better. He started tonight. I thought I asked JJ pregame about DFS starting. He said that he thinks it's looked really good. It's only been 29 minutes of DFS with that lineup. And he said that his analytics team told him that you can't judge a lineup until it's played 250 minutes. So he said he doesn't want to overreact in either direction, but that the early returns are positive. He likes DFS's defensive communication with that group and just his ability to call out coverages and really be like kind of be a defensive captain out there along with AD, and that he's more vocal than like a guy like Max or something like that. So I think DFS should continue starting. I think it's looked good. Again, that lineup got out to the start that they did with DFS out there. He was plus 13, which I believe was the 3rd best mark on the team. Behind Max's plus 14. So DFS lineups continue to do well. I think he should only have a bigger role, and I think he should be the starting small forward moving forward. And then final takeaway is just going to be Vando impressions in game 2. So of note, Vando was the only bench player with a positive plus minus. As I mentioned, the bench really struggled tonight. Like Jackson had a couple nice finishes and finished with 9 points, but again, and even had a couple blocks, but did have a rebound in 17 minutes, which just as a backup center, you have to be able to rebound. And I still think in general allows guys to score at the rim and just isn't a rim protector or rim deterrent, despite the athleticism and the size that he possesses. Shake Milton, I already covered that. And then Dalton continues to get picked on. So like the bench minutes were pretty rough tonight. and that's also where the Gabe and Rui absences come in. But I thought Vando, on the one hand, that'd be 2 for 5 shooting, so a little bit more involved offensively. Took a 3. Lakers actually ran like a pitted flare for Vando in the quarter. Jackson screening for him, and then like the ball got swung to Max, and then he swung it to the corner for Vando. And I think there are better players that you could run that play for, but I guess like from a process perspective, I guess a good action, but I think you'd rather have a different player in that quarter. So I think you saw like Charlotte. I thought Charles Lee coached a really good game, and they did some good things defensively at like after that disaster of a first quarter. But one of the things they did was just ignore Vando or put their guards on him, and I do think you saw at times that gum up the Lakers offense, and they were really packing the paint, and I don't feel like he had also the same opportunities in terms of cutting and offensive rebounds. So he did get a couple dunks, did have a couple steals. He had the huge steal like that's the Vando of just pestering Miles Bridges. He had one that he poked it away, and Miles Bridges had to go recover it. And then I forgot who he picked the pocket of late, but Lakers were up 94-88. It had just been 91-88. They scored. Then they got a couple stops, and then Vando goes and picks the pocket of, again, it might have been Bridges, I'm not sure, then goes out and dunks it. And that was a huge play, and that gave the Lakers a little bit of breathing room. So I think we continue to see Vando start to acclimate. I think the Lakers, as they have more film and more of a sample size, will have to play with where they put him on the floor. And I think we've seen like I don't think he's clearly he gets winded after a few minutes, and I think from like a lateral quickness and just athletic explosion, he's not quite where he was in the past, which makes sense. I think the bigger question is like, can he get back to that, or like how long will it take him to get back to that? But assuming he can, and it's just a couple weeks or a few weeks, whatever, like already he's made a considerable impact with the defense, with the rotating, with the rebounding, playing passing lanes, all that stuff. So Vando continues to look more familiar. I think, again, the offensive role and the spacing, the Lakers have to continue to monitor and tinker with that. And if you're not careful, he can be put in certain positions that compromise the offense and don't compromise the defense. So Lakers, again, have to just be really cognizant of how they space with him. And then I think he'll continue to get his legs under him. Only played 13 minutes tonight, so a little bit more than the Golden State game when he played 12 and a half. But with all that said, let's get into the Q&A. See, we got some super chats already. First one from Gabriel. Getting Turner would help make Vando more playable in the playoffs, being put in lineups where he's the only non-shooter. I'd try swapping DK for Nah. So Nah, there's Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Totally agree with Turner because, basically imagine him taking the Jackson minutes and then obviously some other front court minutes, maybe a little less AD until the playoffs. And then some of the other, like you slot some guys down and maybe you play some more minutes with like DFS at the 2 and some bigger groups like LeBron at the 3, DFS at the 2. But yeah, I mean, Turner, I think Turner is, I've said it countless times, like arguably a lab grown big to put next to AD. Like the two like knocks, I guess, in that profile would just be his rebounding, and he's not like the bulkiest guy. And I think ideally you'd have that guy complementing AD would be a little bulkier, a little bit of a better rebounder, but he can space the floor credibly. Like a lot of parallels between him and Brook Lopez. In Brook Lopez, we've seen how he fits next to Giannis, and there are some similarities, general similarities between Giannis and AD. So the rim protection, the floor spacing, like a 3-and-D big, really going back to it, like I know people were on him for his defense, but Marc Gasol as a quality, still a quality rim protector, not fleet of foot, right? But still a quality rim protector as a Laker, and still a 3-point shooter and facilitator out there. Like there's a graphic that Spectrum put up of AD at the 4 next to each center throughout his Lakers tenure. And still, with Marc Gasol as the floor spacing 5, Lakers were plus 11.3 points per 100 possessions. So you could, like, statistically, AD's best pairing has been him and Marc Gasol through his entire Lakers tenure. So you get different player in Turner, but a guy who can space the floor and protect the rim. I mean, a better defender than Gasol was at that point of his career. So would love it. Dalton for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. This is actually one that was presented, I want to say like a month ago or so. Might have been in the Texas trip. And I really thought about it, and I ran it by some Minnesota people, and they thought it was interesting just because they as an organization were high on Dalton. They weren't quite sure how they would feel about a theoretical trade like this, but I think I would do it. I'm not quite sure what if it would just be straight up or if one side would demand something more. I think either side could make an argument that, like, that Dalton's ceiling is higher, but Nickeil's better right now, and he's more of a two-way guy. Dalton's more of just an offensive guy. So kind of, that's an interesting one, but I've been a little bit lower on Dalton recently for, like, competing now, which is what I think the Lakers are trying to do in terms of the best or the next 18 months. And I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a better player over the next 18 months. Longer term, you could obviously sell me on Dalton being better, but I think the Lakers are trying to win this season and next season. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker helps more. Hale Ford, thank you for the super chat. Even with their normal rotation players, they have a tendency to play with their food. Another trade or two is needed to fortify the bench. Yeah, I still, like, the interesting thing with tonight and just with the Lakers on a nightly basis is, like, every night it kind of feels like they have a different need. Like going back to the Golden State game, it felt like, again, they were fine largely on the wings, and it was like, okay, maybe you could use another ball handler, or certainly, AD has the center request, so you could use a better center than Jackson Hayes. Like, those seem to be more the two needs that were standing out. And then tonight you could still, now no Gabe, so that changed. Like, of course they needed an extra ball handler tonight, but could still use one better than Shake. And then Jackson, still, like, it's still a need. But I felt like the biggest need tonight was, like, no one could guard Miles Bridges. And Vando, Vando was disruptive a bit, but he didn't, like, lock him down overall. And DFS, I thought Miles Bridges got him a few times, both downhill and hitting jumpers on him. So, I still think the way, like, the two-way wing need that I've been a proponent of, I've softened on it a little bit with Vando back now and DFS looking better, and, like, just the way Max is playing, the way that Gabe's playing, like, I kind of feel like they have enough perimeter defense in theory if everyone's healthy. And also I did think in the Golden State game, like, not having Rui, actually there was an addition by subtraction defensively. And really, if you can get Dalton out of the rotation too, I think you don't really have many negative defenders or guys that could be picked on. So I guess I felt tonight that the perimeter defense need was again, and partly, like, no Gabe. He's not guarding Miles Bridges or shutting him down, but tonight felt like another game where it was like, okay, if you could have another wig out there, that would help. That would be nice. But it does feel like night to night the needs kind of shift. And I think we know, like, AD put pressure in terms of getting a center, so that's going to be a priority for them. But in terms of a secondary move, if they make either get a couple players back or do a couple trades between the ball handler and the wing, I kind of go back and forth. I've actually started to lean more ball handler, as I'm kind of hinting here, but I do think if there was a way to, like, that's why I like the Lonzo Ball, Bruce Brown types, because they can be both. They can be ball handlers, either primary or secondary ball handlers, but they can also defend. And maybe you have to slot Max up a little bit depending on the lineup, but, like, Lonzo and Bruce Brown are both plus defenders, and I think would help this group. Leonard, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, love the show and figured I'd use my first super chat on one of the best in the business. I appreciate that. Shout out to Leonard for his first super chat. If the Lakers strike out, what about a reunion with Drummond? You bring up a good point, because one thing I have been thinking a little bit more about is the potential buyout market and like who is going to be available. So if a guy like Drummond gets traded elsewhere and gets bought out, or just buyout situation with Philly as their season's gone off the rails and they're potentially trying to tank, then I think Drummond would fulfill the needs of what the Lakers want. I don't think he's like, I don't think he's a huge difference maker, but he's a big body. He's still a good rebounder. And especially in against certain second units, I think he can be pretty, like he's had stretches where he's dominated the Lakers with his finishing inside. Like there's still, to me, like the mobility and the finishing, I think like he's not like a lob threat really. I feel like the finishing was better and has declined since he's gotten a bit older, but he's big, he's tough, he's got the rebounding, he's got some familiarity with LeBron and AD. I hope they don't promise him a starting job. That would be something that maybe they could learn from, and more so clarify like you are a 15-minute a night backup setter. But as long as they do that, I don't love Drummond with AD, to be honest. I view him kind of more as like a just pure backup who, I don't know. I like it. I don't love it. I'll just say that. But for a minimum, if that's the best they can do, it's a minimum guy. Like I would hope they made a separate trade to go get a Bruce Brown, Alonzo, or something where they're trying to address a different need, and then getting a center on the on the buyout market. If this is like the primary, like if they don't make a move and then they go just get Drummond on the buyout market, like I think that's a not ideal trade deadline outcome, personally. Shabugan, thank you for the super chat. It also didn't help that LeBron had one of his performances. He was turgid for most of that game and looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Yeah, LeBron, 22 points, 9 of 17 shooting, 1 of 8 on threes. So 7 of his 8 misses were on threes, 3 for 5 at the free throw line, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, 5 turnovers though. So a high turnover game for him. And yeah, it felt like he was just playing. They were like the flow of the offense was pretty bad tonight. They were dribbling the clock out, running a lot of just like late pick and roll to try and mismatch hunt with LeBron, and just kind of settling for either contested jumpers against smaller guys, which a lot of those actually went down, or kind of, the kick out or skip passes like late in the clock. So I didn't love the pace and just like the flow and the rhythm of the offense. And a big part of that is LeBron. So certainly I'm with you. It's funny that like LeBron can still have like a bad or off night and have 22, 7, and 8. That's just like, he just puts up, like he walks on the court and walks into those types of performances. But certainly I felt from a offensive pace and rhythm perspective, subpar night, especially over the final 3 quarters. Ali, JHS, 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks for Kessler. I'm risking it all. You're putting it all on, well, black or red. I don't know. Pick your color. But I don't want to spoil my trade targets episode that's coming out on Wednesday, but I'm getting to that point. I think that Kessler, it's like, yeah, I'm kind of getting to that point of considering both firsts. I'm in the ballpark. I'm not quite there yet, but give me 24 hours and I might talk myself into it. It's a big. I think the other thing that people need to remember with the Kessler situation too is like, if you trade for him, he's 23. When he's 25 or 26, 2 to 3 years from now, you can trade him. Like, I would be shocked if whatever price the Lakers ultimately give for him, if they do acquire him, if they cannot get that back in 2 to 3 years, if they really are like tearing it down, or they're somehow going to get like 2 or 3 stars to come to LA together and they have to shed salary or something, like I would be very surprised if you can't get at least a couple of first round picks for Walker Kessler when he's 25 or 26. Like, he'll be not even in his prime yet, and he's already a double 2+ block a night guy. Like, I think you can recoup those assets if you really need to. So, and if you don't, like, that's because he's really good and he's on your team already. So like you make trades to get good players. That's just how it works. And in this case, you're not even giving up a rotation player. So yeah, I'm not quite to the 2 first-round picks, but I'm getting there. Smokey, thank you for the super chat. Gabe Rui in 2031 first for DeJounte gets us a former second team all defensive player who's been in the finals as a rookie, conference finals as a rookie versus KD Warriors. JHS Hayes in seconds for Jay Wilson replaces Rui, and D Sharp sign Fultz. I think that New Orleans would want more, which is tough because DeJounte's had a pretty rough season, but it's just from a organization's care about optics, and to give up 2 firsts and Dyson Daniels, and not only 2 firsts, but including the Lakers first, which is a potentially, I mean, right now it's not looking like a great pick, but like at the time it was a pretty big asset. I think they'd probably want more. I don't think he's worth more based on the season he's had, but that I think they would want more. Other 2 moves I like, Fultz, there's the bit of the shooting and the injury history there, but taking a flyer on him after losing Gabe, I think he's better than Shake. And then I like Wilson and I like Sharp still, and I view those as, I think Sharp's an upgrade over Hayes, and Wilson, clear upgrade over JHS, but like a guy who can be like a back end rotation guy probably. I'm not as sold on DeJounte Murray just because of how rough of a season he's had. If you could do it for a first, he like the theory of him, the one, note the defense, but I would push back and just say like he hasn't been that type of defender in like 3 years. And in theory, it was like he gets through Atlanta. Okay, like you take a step back offensively from what you're doing in San Antonio, but because you're next to Trey now, but like you could ramp it up defensively. That didn't really happen. And then now being in New Orleans hasn't really happened either. So I think the defense is a little overrated. However, the theory of him is like putting another backcourt player next to Austin who can get downhill, create his own shot, and is athletic, is quick, and in theory can be a better defender than Austin. I like that. So like from a player archetype perspective, he does check the box, and that's why I felt LA should have traded for him last year. But it would ultimately come down to the price for me. I guess a first I would consider it. I don't think I would go higher, and I do think New Orleans would want more, to be honest. Ali, if we get Turner, LeBron would take a pay cut. That's certainly possible. LeBron has a player option for next season, and one thing that's been floated out there is the possibility of, depending on either who's available next summer or if LA makes a trade and that player is an impending free agent, LeBron has the potential flexibility to take a pay cut. So that is within the realm of possibility. Michael D, I think Lakers from 1 to 2 months ago lose this game. I probably agree. That said, like they have been pretty good against bad teams. If I'm going to pull it up, I'm going to guess they're like 13-1, 14-1 now against 16-2 against below 500 teams. So they pretty much have not lost this type of game. Now, I would say maybe because they were shorthanded with no Rui and no Gabe, like that, maybe they do, that version of them loses it because of who had to play in the back end of the rotation. But this is not, I would say they've had like 5 to 7 games, almost not quite carbon copies, because they have rarely led by 20 in the first, and they've obviously not had like, that was AD's best quarter of the season. So that's like a bit of an anomaly, but in general, they've had games where they've been up like 10-15 against bad teams. The bad team goes on a run at some point, makes it a game, and then LA holds on, and it's like a win, but you don't really feel good about it. And that was kind of how tonight went. Jean-Pierre, if we have to settle for Jonas, can we get him for JHS, Shake, and either Wood/Hayes, keeping Rui and Gabe? Maybe. I'd have to look at Washington's contract situation. It might have to be a 3-team trade in that case. The one issue is like, I mean, you are sending out expiring contracts. Shake has 2 more years, but they're both non-guaranteed, so he could be waived. And then Wood and Hayes are expiring. JHS is expiring. I wonder if honestly Washington prefers like 3 guys for Jonas instead of taking back Gabe or Rui and those guys having an extra year. And then obviously if you put in Rui, then they got to send out another player and get it a little bit closer because they're not just going to take on like $7 million. So I think if they had like an extra roster spot, which I'm not sure if they do, I'm going to assume they don't. It's interesting, but I it would help if the Lakers had an extra second, and they could go acquire one if, let's say they put Wood in this trade and they go give Hayes to someone else for like a second, like some team like Dallas. And it's kind of weird trading with a rival, but Dallas is really banged up in the front court. You trade them Hayes for a second, and then you could use that second in a Jonas trade or a trade for another big. Like, could you get Robert Williams for 3 seconds? Now you probably have to give up Gabe, but maybe Portland doesn't want Gabe and they want the minimum guys. So maybe it's obviously tough. They can't just take on 2 more guys, and they have to figure out, are they rerouting them? Is it a 3-team trade? Are they waiving them? I don't know their tax situation off the top of my head. So in theory, like it might actually make more sense for Washington to not take on the extra year of Rui or Gabe, but in practicality, it is a bit tricky where, again, you potentially have to add in a 3rd team and then you have to send them an asset to take on a minimum contract, or you have to potentially put in an extra asset to Washington to make them deal with the headache of waiving or rerouting guys. Keon Park, DK and a first for Kessler, then Rui, JHS and a first for something big, or Rui, Gabe and a first for something bigger. If we get Kess, then AD, Kess, Vando, DFS, and Christie will be enough. I'm fully on board with Dalton and a first for Kessler. I'm not sure if Utah would do that. I think they will want more, but if you could do that, I would do that. Rui, JHS and a first, or Rui, Gabe and a first for something bigger. So Rui, JHS gets you in the 20, a little bit past $20 million range. Rui, Gabe and a first, or Rui and Gabe gets you about 28. So you do have some options there in terms of the types of guys you could get. Rui and Gabe gets you in the conversation for a Cam Johnson. They probably want more than a first, though. Rui and JHS, you're in the market for. You probably have to throw in. You have to throw in one more guy for Bruce Brown, but like Lonzo, Bruce Brown, Vucevic, Pirtle. Even though those 2 guys, Mark Stein just reported that he's heard the Lakers are not interested in them, but like that's the realm or the caliber of player you can get. Rich Forever Rondo, thank you for the super chat. Lakers should target the best available offensive scoring / shooting wing. They can Cam Johnson, Ingram, any similar archetype available you'd like to see. Between those 2, Cam Johnson's much more realistic, if only because of the salary. He's got about, I want to say it's like 23 million on the books, but then there's a weird trade thing with him where it counts as 27 going out. So you have to match that, but then Brooklyn is technically taking on more money. So it gets a little complicated to trade for Cam Johnson. Realistically, honestly, like a 3rd team is probably needed to help. If it's like Rui, Gabe, and a minimum guy, you probably want a 3rd team to either take Gabe or the minimum guy to alleviate things for Brooklyn. And they'd probably have to send out another guy just to kind of salary match. But Ingram, I think that the one like Ingram versus Johnson, obviously Ingram's a better player, but I don't think there's that big of a defensive gap. Like I think Ingram's the better defender, but they're both kind of around average to below average. And I think Cam Johnson's a much more natural off-ball fit because he's been basically a 42% three-point shooter on like 6 to 7 attempts per game for his entire career. And that level of shooter around LeBron and AD, like that's the caliber of shooter Lakers want Dalton Connect to become and turn into. But it's even at like a different, like DFS has had some shooting seasons like that, but not quite at the same volume and not as consistently. So that's where like Cam Johnson would immediately step in and be their best shooter. And I think, especially if you're trading Rui in that trade, he's essentially a better version of Rui. Like Rui's smaller and stronger and plays with more physicality, I think, defensively, but Johnson's a bit longer, taller, can, I think, defend wings a little better, and then offensively is just a natural fit as like a high level shooter. So between these two, I would lean Cam Johnson. Ingram, it's also tough for them to get to the salary because we mentioned, or it was mentioned, Rui and Gabe, and that gets you 28. Ingram's in the mid 30s, so you actually need, unless you're throwing Max in the deal, which Lakers I don't think would do, you basically have to put in 2 more minimum guys, and now you're sending 4 guys out for Brandon Ingram, and now New Orleans has to figure out, is this a 3-team trade, or like, so the Lakers losing D'Lo was a big piece in terms of salary matching, and it was expiring. So it does feel like, I've said recently, like anything above 30 million in terms of a player salary, or if they're getting a couple players, anything above 30 million, I think is relatively unrealistic unless they're throwing in Austin or Max or Vando. But then Austin and Max, they don't want to trade. Vando, you're going to have to attach a first. So just to put him in the trade. So that's the going price right now. Harry Chinani, thank you for the super chat. Rui's injury, a blessing. Hope JJ keeps the starting 5. I agree. Like, look, you never want a guy to get injured, and it's obviously not a serious injury for Rui, so that's the good news for him. But I think it's shown, 1, that he's relatively expendable to this group, and 2, DFS makes more sense as a starter. The starting group has looked good on both, in both instances, against Golden State and against Charlotte. We'll see. It sounded like JJ was leaning toward Rui and Gabe not playing tomorrow in Philly. He said he expects both will be back at some point on this trip. They still got games in Washington, New York, and then back in LA against the Clippers, technically as the road team. So that to me screamed more like Washington or New York portion of the trip. So if he's out again tomorrow, we see another example of what, or another sample size, data point of DFS as the starting 3. And I think LA should win because Paul George and Joel Embiid are both supposed to be out. So I know, look, they almost tricked this one away. So they got to be careful. Second night of a back-to-back. We'll see how they're doing in terms of energy. JJ said the plan is for everyone who played tonight to play tomorrow, but he also then kind of gave the caveat of, we got to see how everyone feels tomorrow. I followed up with LeBron and AD and about those two, and he was like, we got to see how they feel. So there's a chance one of those two guys could miss, with it being second night of a back-to-back, and a relatively, like, it's not like it's not a horrible flight, but it's not like the closest back-to-back in terms of Charlotte and Philly, and it's a pretty quick turnaround. So I would not be surprised if one of them misses. I would assume as of now both play, but it would not be like a shocker if one of those two, like, they both have been questionable. AD obviously missed the game recently with the foot situation. So, I think we should have a clearer idea as things continue in terms of like DFS's fit and how JJ ultimately determines the starting group moving forward. Eeg, thank you for the super chat. Trading Dalton would seem very off-brand for the Lakers, but if they do, is he valued on the market like you're getting a first? If I'm the recipient, I'm stoked. It would be off-brand for the Lakers. They are, especially more recently, I would say, in the Rob era, they have been more, I think, like they discover their guys, and there's a certain fondness of them, at least in the beginning, right? Like, I think honestly there were sides JHS wasn't very good last year, and you probably could have gotten, not even probably, you could have gotten more value for JHS if you were willing to trade him last year. Their THT, of course, Austin and Max, and those two have worked out well, and that, I think the front office deserves credit for both scouting those guys and then also keeping those guys and signing them to reasonable deals. Although part of it was the second round pick for Max, undrafted for Austin. Like, some things worked in their favor in terms of restricted free agency, the Arenas rule, that stuff. But still, they signed the contracts. They signed them to Austin the most he could sign with them. Max a reasonable deal that actually some people felt was an overpay. I felt it was appropriate. I think it's aged well, but still, like, and then you look at some of the other guys, like, really the one that blows my mind is like the Caruso. Like, that was a discovery. I mean, technically he was a OKC Thunder or OKC Blue, whatever their G League team is, but like LA discovered him and then they let him walk. Otherwise it's largely been, to your point, like, they tend to, and then of course the baby Lakers, but that was partly a previous regime, and then it was the AD trade. So it would be off brand. I think the market's lower on Dalton than it was earlier in the season, but like coming off of that stretch he had, I was talking to people and I was just curious, like, if Lakers want to trade him, what do you think they could get? I was hearing 2 firsts, and now I don't know about like the quality of the first. It could have been 2 bad firsts. It could have been 1 good first, 1 bad first. But like, that was the way he was viewed at the time. And granted, he was shooting like, 1,000,000% on threes, averaging 20 plus points a game over like a 5-6 game stretch. So that was different context. But I would say now he's easily first round value. Like, I think there's an understanding that he's going kind of through the rookie wall and needs to get over that, get through that, and defensively has room for improvement. But I think the teams that were like, there were plenty of teams around the league that were high on Dalton, and I think those teams, if there was a chance to get him back, would be interested in him. I don't think the market has like all of a sudden soured on Dalton. LA, thank you for the super chat. 3-team trade idea. LA gets Josh Green and Cody Martin from Charlotte, and Dayron from Brooklyn. Charlotte gets Rui JHS via the Lakers. Brooklyn gets Cam Wood, 2 seconds, 1 from LA, 1 from Charlotte. So LA gives up 1 second, Rui, JHS, Cam, and Wood. And they get Dayron, Josh Green, Cody Martin. I would ideally like to give up Rui and get, if I'm giving up Rui, I'd ideally like to get back more. Now you're keeping both firsts, you're keeping a second. I mean, this might honestly like be more in the realm of like what LA is considering. Now I will say with Rui, I think that the bar, as I've said, is a little bit like their perception of Rui versus the league's perception of Rui. There's a bit of a gap there, and I don't think they would trade him in this type of deal. I think they'd want a bigger name back for Rui, just to kind of say they got player X in return for him. But this type of deal, I think, is more along the lines of like a realistic outcome, especially if they don't want to trade their firsts or are hesitant for the prices of some of these guys. I mean, I think Rui's better than any of the 3 guys that they're getting back. But again, from a cost perspective, you're not really giving up any draft capital. And I like all these guys in a vacuum. Again, I think Dayron could push Jackson for the backup 5 minutes. Josh Green and Cody Martin are 2 3-and-D player archetypes. They are a bit on the smaller side in terms of more like 6'5", 6'6". And to me, they project more as like 8th or 9th men on this team. But I kind of lean no, but I don't dislike it. I think ideally for LA, and look, maybe because you're not willing to give up more draft capital to trade off Rui, like this is the best you could do. Like I actually, if all things were equal, I think this is like a relatively realistic trade. I in factoring in how they value Rui and just how important he has been to this team. Now, recently that has changed and he has not played as well. The lineup data has shown it's I probably know, but I don't think it's like a bad trade. Rui's really a backup 4, and he's been a starting 3. We'll say he's out of role, so the judgment by us maybe has been too harsh. That's a good point. That's a really good point. Rui has been asked to do, like, he's not a wing stopper, and he's been Kranjus has the B-ball index defensive and offensive roles, and his role defensively has been a wing stopper, and I think the Lakers have 3 players who are just better at that role than him in DFS, Vando, and Max. And Rui has been playing out of position. He's more of a 4 and more of a backup 4, and he should be more of like a 20 to 24 minute a night backup. And like a guy who's capable, just almost broke the desk here. A guy who's capable of stepping up and playing a bigger role if needed. But I think right now the Lakers are, obviously I'm gonna bring up the comparison that I did not anticipate making. Like, there's some level of kind of Torian here, and I think Rui's better than Torian, but it's still kind of like, and it's funny because last year it was the opposite, where Rui was the guy coming off the bench and he was better than Torian, and the team looked better with him on the floor, and it took forever to make that swap. Feels like the same thing is kind of brewing here, where DFS is the better fit with the starters. He has looked better. He has played better. The lineup data has backed it up. He has shot better than Rui. And it feels like Rui is just kind of being put in a position that he's not really equipped to handle as like the wing stopper. And I would even say, like, I think LeBron was better defensively last season than this season. So I think LeBron has slipped a bit. I think AD has honestly slipped a bit defensively, and Austin has slipped a bit defensively. So I actually think, like, you had D'Lo instead of Max. So that was obviously a big, like, that's a big upgrade going from D'Lo to Max. But I would argue the 3 best offensive players have all slipped to varying degrees defensively this season. And that with also, I think Rui has slipped defensively. That combination's bad. That's why those lineups have not been good, or that lineup in particular. So I think you got to always just react to the new information you have. And the new information is the starting group has been bad post DFS trade. It was starting to be bad pre DFS trade. And I think the weakest link of all is clearly Rui, and it should be DFS in that spot. But to your point, like, it's not anything against Rui. He is being asked to play a position and do things that he is not. And I also think Rui's a very rhythm-based player offensively. And with the starting group, he is typically the 4. Really, he's been the 5th option. Like, Max has passed him in terms of the pecking order recently. So, like, Max has been the 4th option. Rui's the 5th option. And as the 5th option, Rui's just getting, like, random spot up threes from the corners or like the baseline cuts. But I think he's a much more rhythm-based player offensively, and moving him to the bench. And like, I think if you go back and look at the last 2 games, look at when Dalton comes in and imagine Rui in those spots. It just makes all the sense in the world. Like Dalton is basically and granted, he's not played particularly great, especially tonight, but Dalton has basically been in what the Rui role should be, which is come in for LeBron midway through the first quarter and play 20 to 24 minutes off the bench. Like, that should be the Rui role, and really just go out there and like shoot and do your thing offensively. Like, that's what Rui should be doing, not play 30 plus minutes a night and guard the opponent's best wing if they're like above 6'7", because that's probably too much to ask a Max. Like, that should be DFS doing that. So that was my Rui tangent. Shabugid, thank you for the super chat. Stein has us out on Vooch and Pirtle. Multiple sources saying Kessler's off the table. Is this just careening towards JV and fan hatred? I will add to this a little bit. So I had been hearing more recently. Well, so I heard recently about Vooch in terms of them not being as high on him. I had not heard Pirtle, so that is new information, at least on my end. And I'd been hearing for a month plus, going back to around like once they didn't trade for Jonas, they could have traded for him December 15th. That was the first date. Once they went past that and didn't trade for him, I started sending out feelers and just like, why haven't they traded for Jonas? Like, what's going on? And then they do the DFS trade, and basically everything I've heard is like they've cooled on him, and not saying it's off the table because there could be an element of smoke screening, or he could end up, just to your point, being the best center that is actually available. And at that point, it's a guy that AD and LeBron wanted last summer. You didn't land him, but now is your chance to give AD the center that he wanted and land that guy, even though they just saw him in Washington. They're about to see him again. And I think he's going to be rough out there, but for him. So I'll say like there's a couple names you haven't mentioned. So with Kessler, I think it comes down to, I think the Lakers have to blow they don't need to trade Kessler. It's not like some contentious situation, or they're not like out on him. He's not some distressed asset. So I think they have to be blown away with an offer. And I think it just comes down to them and the Lakers having a standoff or a stare down, whatever, and seeing which one is going to play chicken first. With some other names, like you didn't mention Robert Williams. I think he's very much in play here. Miles Turner, potentially, depending on Indiana has a decision to make as to his future. The one fear I would have if I'm the Lakers is if there is a bidding war for Miles Turner, there are I think Golden State is a situation that would make a lot of sense for Miles Turner. There are other situations, like a lot of teams could use a 6'11" guy who can shoot average to above average on threes and be a plus rim protector. Like that player is valuable. I think there are teams that would consider giving probably 2 firsts for Turner or somewhere in that range. So LA has to decide if he really is available in the next week and a half, what is the price they're willing to pay. But to your point, it was kind of interesting that Stein didn't mention JV. And he did say like there hasn't been any momentum or something toward that type of trade, but that was not a guy he ruled out. I'm not quite at the point of ruling JV out, but I mean, they could have had him over a month and a half ago. They haven't traded for him. He didn't look good in the game in LA. And Gabe is like, I think Gabe is more valuable than JV, just straight up. And you potentially have to give assets like Gabe in 2 seconds. I think the Lakers lose that trade, to be honest, right now. So if maybe it's a situation, where you could do like multiple minimum guys and I don't know. But if it is just JV, I think there will be some fan hatred and some disappointment. Capella's another name that's interesting because he got benched in Atlanta. He's a guy that I've liked dating back to the summer. I've not, to be clear, for the aggregators, have not heard him linked to the Lakers, but he is someone I've heard that teams are monitoring in general. So maybe Capella is someone that now Capella's, I want to say, he's making 19, so you probably have to put in Rui, but I like Capella. Angelco, thank you for the super chat. Yo, thanks always for the excellent quality content. Jovan, do Robert Williams and Bruce Brown have a high probability of joining the Lakers before the deadline? I wouldn't say high. I don't think there's any player right now that has a high probability. So any player we talk about, I put it at under 50%. I do think that those are 2 guys that they have had interest in, have had talks with Portland and Toronto about, and 2 guys that are near the top of their realistic trade target list. But again, it takes 2 to tango. Portland has wanted at least a first for Williams. I think Toronto is going to be trying to ask for a first for Bruce Brown. So I think it comes down to like, can LA protect one of those firsts? Can they get either of those guys for a couple seconds? And in both cases, for Bruce, it has to be Rui. For Williams, you could either do Gabe or Rui, but if you do Rui, then Portland has to send something else out. So I think there's like relatively high compared to maybe some of the other names, but still in general, I would say under 50% easily for both of these guys. Eag, JHS, Vando, Rui, Gabe equals about 43 million. Miles Turner and Lonzo. I'm kind of confused on personally prefer. Okay. So JHS, Vando, Rui, and Gabe is 43 million. Got it. Okay. I was Miles Turner and Lonzo is 42 million. So you're saying you could do a 3-team where you get Turner and Lonzo, and for those 4, personally prefer BI and a cheaper big for the 43 million, but that seems like a win percent chance. I think that I'd honestly put this at like a 15% chance because, again, as I mentioned earlier, like 10 to 15, I think it's relatively low just because, I've been saying I think anything above 30 million is technically possible, but it's tough for them to pull off because you got to determine who's going where. But whoever is getting Vando is going to demand a first-round pick just for Vando. If it's Chicago, forget the Lonzo price. Just for Vando, they want a first-round pick. If it's Indiana, forget the Miles Turner price. Just for Vando, it's going to be a first-round pick. I know Laker fans are excited about Vando in the 2 games. This has not shifted the way he is viewed across the league. The league views it as he's more of he's not worth his contract. He has 3 more years. They're going to demand a first-round pick to take on Vando. So whatever, if Miles Turner costs a first and something else, now you're giving up both firsts. If Lonzo is 2 seconds, now you're giving up a first and 2 seconds. And then if you're talking about Turner, you're almost certainly here giving up both firsts, both seconds, and a swap or something just to get this done. And I don't think the Lakers want to give up all that. So I would say, I'm even talking myself out of it, maybe 5%, 10%. There's always a chance the Lakers are doing a huge smoke screen here, and they are sneakily putting together some type of package for both first round picks, and they're going all in. But as I've reported, as others have reported, it seems like they are not thrilled about the current trade market. They aren't necessarily looking to use both firsts, and a more realistic outcome is a smaller move, likely with both seconds, potentially with a protected first. But I think that's probably the most they're willing to give up right now, unless the Turner talks, the Kessler talks, the price goes below 2 firsts. I think that would change that. But for now, and maybe Turner is an exception, but for now, I think based on the intel I've heard up to this point, it seems like they don't really want to go above that first price point. Ali, besides 29 and 31 picks, what do we have in the summer? So actually the Lakers don't gain access to any new picks in the summer because of the Stepien rule, because they traded 27. So they don't have 25. They do have 26, but they can't trade it because they don't have 25 and 27. So they'll have 26, they'll have 28, but then 28 they also can't trade because they traded 27. So that's why the first pick they can trade is 29. I guess technically post, you can only trade 7 years out. So post 2025 draft, they'll have access to the 2032. But again, they can't, but it's just then a matter of so technically they'd add a second pick option in terms of you could do 30 and 32, or you could still do 29 and 31. So you would add a second year that you could put in. You could trade 29 and 32, but it doesn't really make sense because then you can't trade 30, and then you also can't trade 31 because of the every other year rule. But more, it gives you a pick swap. So they can do pick swaps in 26, 28, and 30, and then 32. So you would have upwards of 2 first-round picks, 4 pick swaps, and then you'd gain access to your 2032 second. So if they kept the 2 seconds, they'd be post-draft. So they would just have 1 second actually in 2032 second. So that would be the assets this summer. But they gain a first-round pick in terms of trading that year, but they still can only trade 2 firsts, if that makes sense. I hope it did. Okay, well, Rui, Gabe, JHS, 2 firsts for Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas, and Sharp. I don't think Brooklyn does it. I think they'd want more, but if the Lakers could do it, I would do it. I think they'd want at least, they want 2 firsts for Cam Johnson, and they probably want a first for Cam Thomas, and then some second round capital for Sharp. So maybe you got to add in like a swap or something, but I do like that. Eeg, last thing on Rui. JJ knows 500 times more hoops than all of us. He knows DFS needs to start. They cannot immediately just bench Rui for new guy in December, January, politics, egos, feelings, etc. It will come though. This is another good point. This is why I said that, like going back earlier in the season when Dalton had his stretch with Rui out, I said Rui is going to continue to start because that's just how these things work. He has seniority. He was a guy who was on the Western Conference Finals run, was starting last year when they turned the season around and lost to Denver. So I think there's a similar element here of kind of seniority and pecking order. And look, JJ really does like Rui. So that's also an element that we can't look past. But we've seen it in some games where he has closed over Rui. So I think that in and of itself is an acknowledgement of, like, you could argue closing is more important than starting, because at that point it's like, we need to find a way to win this game. Who are the guys I trust in this big moment? And he's leaned more toward DFS than Rui. So that enough, or that alone says enough. But to your point, I think it, maybe if Rui misses another couple games, they go 4-0, JJ can sell him on it of saying like, look, we're basically 500 with this starting group. We're 4-0 with this starting group. The lineup that also supports this, like, we got to keep this guy in the starting lineup, but we shall see. I would suspect as of right now, Rui probably goes back in, and if the change happens, it's maybe post deadline after they make a couple moves, which potentially could be trading Rui. Ray, is a Miles Turner trade realistic? I think right now right now I would say no. The thing that I reported, and as always, the aggregation and the, like, I answered like 7 questions about Miles Turner last stream, but then, some parts were cherry picked and some parts were left out of the aggregation, which it was a 2-hour stream, so I get to some extent. But point being, like, my thing was a non-Lakers person that I talked to, someone in the league that has been a reliable source for me when just kind of talking through different guys that could be available. They told me that Miles Turner is a sneaky one that could become available because of his contract situation. He has an expiring contract, cannot be, I forgot the date he could be extended, but he wants in the ballpark of 30 plus million, kind of starting around 30, but obviously ideally more if you're him. And Indiana isn't sure that they want to meet that price. So in the case that they don't want to meet that price, he could just walk this summer, or them do a sign and trade or something. But there's a chance that it just might make more sense to ship him out now and get something back of value, including picks, young guys, whatever. The one thing with this is that they don't have a great backup center situation. So if Indiana is trying to compete, which all signs are they are, and they've never been a team that's tanked, as I've said numerous times, they then would probably want a center back. And that's where, like, maybe you could do a 3-team trade where Rui goes somewhere else and a center goes to Indiana. But if it's like Rui, JHS, and a first and something else for Turner, if you're Indiana, you already have a bunch of forwards. Pascal Siakam's your second best player, but you have Mathurin and Neesmith and Shepard, and they're trying to get Jarris Walker some more burn. So, like, you have a logjam in your front court already at the 3 and the 4, and Obi Toppin, I didn't mention him. Like, so they don't really need Rui. They need more of a center. So that's where, like, maybe you could find a 3-team trade. So I think the first question is, like, how available is Miles Turner, which I haven't got a great read on. I will say no one has come out and reported that he's not available. So that, I think, is interesting, that like there's the aggregation, and then you sometimes see like a team reporter or something come out, and maybe that will come out in the next few days. Maybe he's not available, but that's what I heard. I didn't even report it to be aggregated. I just answered a question and then it got aggregated. So that's that. But if he is available, let's just say, then I think if you're the Lakers, like this is a guy you've tried to get multiple times. He fits perfectly next to AD. He's the type of big that AD and LeBron would want. And I think if he is available, he is relatively realistic. Though the asking price could get crazy and there could be a bidding war and the Lakers could be outbid. So I would say if he's available, it's semi-realistic, but the bigger question is he available? And that is something that we're going to see in the next 10 days in terms of how Indiana, what they decide his value is. And if he isn't okay with that in terms of a potential extension or re-signing this summer, then I think they will look to potentially move him. Back into the chat. I know, so I've gone 15 minutes over. A lot of super chats. I'm trying to catch up here. Ryan Rich. I'm going to go. You know what? I see the audience has grown since we'll go 10 more minutes. And then I know it's earlier on the West Coast, but again, I got to fly in less than 10 hours. So I have a quick turnaround myself. Ryan Rich, do you think the Lakers for sure trade JHS since they declined his rookie extension? I wouldn't say for sure, but I think logically, if I'm any team trading with the Lakers, JHS is a low risk swing. And if it's between JHS and Christian Wood, JHS and Cam Reddish, even JHS and Jackson Hayes, I think I would prefer to take the swing on JHS as a guy who's a year, now a year and a half removed from being the number 17 pick. Because I also think there's an element here of like, we've seen guys not necessarily work out with the Lakers. And then like, look at Scottie Pippen Jr., Jay Huff. There's been, Cole Swider even kind of had not like a moment, but it, he looked like there was some interest in him. And like now, Kyler Kelly just got picked up by Dallas. So like people have interest in Lakers prospects. That's kind of been a thing. And JHS has had some good games in the G League. So I wonder if I'm a rival and I'm asking for all these assets, and I'm still going to ask for them. I'm going to ask for Austin. I'm going to ask for Dalton. I'm going to ask for Max. I'm going to ask for the picks. I'm going to ask for swaps. I'm going to ask for seconds. A sneaky addition is JHS. And I would rather just take the swing of let's get this dude in the building. Let's see what he's got to get healthy, but let's see what he looks like with the G League team. Let's see what he looks like in practice. Let's at least like take the swing on him, because like if we're talking just pure upside, like Cam Reddish is a known commodity. It's a pretty low ceiling. JHS has looked like he has a low ceiling, but like there's at least a little untapped potential there. He's still 21. I would take that swing. Now, I think the Lakers are going to try and dump Christian Wood or Cam, but between those two, and see if maybe they could salvage JHS in some way. But I think if it really comes down to it and a team wants him, I think they'll put him in. So I don't think there's anyone on the team right now that I would say like for sure is getting traded, but I could see one of the minimum guys, including potentially JHS, either being a throw into a trade or getting shipped somewhere to then be waived elsewhere and for LA to create a roster spot. Art Worthy, Jovan, should Lakers shop lower quality starter players like Max and Gabe for salary relief, get non-tax paying buyout agents? I think Max and Gabe are in two totally different stratospheres. Gabe is a slightly negative asset. I think he's played his way into being a better asset, but there's still a lot of concern about the health and the shooting, like consistency. Max is a positive asset, and he's 21. He's the second or third youngest player on the team. He's playing well as a starter right now. I don't want to say he's untouchable. I don't want to say like there's what caliber of player you should trade him for, but I do not think Max Christie should be like a throw-in for a trade. I think he should only be in a trade if you're getting like a player that is notably better than him back, and frankly a player who could like defend in the same ballpark as him, because he's been a big defensive piece for this group. So he's handled those primary guard assignments, and I don't think DFS can do that. And even Vando, in theory, can do that, but he's not the shooter that Max is. He's not the he can't attack closeouts the way Max can. And like, I think Max has been probably their fourth best player for like over a month now. So I would not just throw in Max to then go sign like a buyout player. Buyout guys typically do not make a difference. If you go through NBA history, there are at least from like a championship perspective, if you look at the champions, occasionally there'll be a buyout guy who has like a moment in the playoffs, and I'm not going to downplay that potential impact, but they're typically bench players, and they're typically like guys who don't play a lot. Max is a starter on the fifth best team in the West right now, like a 30 lock-in 30 plus minute a night guy. I don't think you just like dump that guy. L.A. Will Rui and Gabe play tomorrow? It sounded coming out of this game like probably not, but we will get a injury update around like 12. So we'll have a better idea then. But at least the way that JJ was talking about it sounded like not. Jovan, are you going to Philly tomorrow? Yes. And also, what can the Lakers do with their presumed cap space this summer? I don't even know if the Lakers are going to are they going to have cap space? I don't think they are. Quickly check. 25-26. According to SpotTrack, they have minus 70 in cap space. Now that's with LeBron and DFS's player options, but they got 54 to 80, 52 to LeBron, 18 to Rui, 15.4 to DFS, just under 14 to Austin. So just right there, you're at 154. Vando 11.6. Gabe, yeah. So Max. They do not have cap space. The Lakers are, I believe, even here over the first apron. So yeah, they don't have cap space. J Note, does Utah really want Dalton and 2 first-round picks for Kessler? I think that price would get it done. The question is, can you do a variation of a lower price of Dalton and a first, or just the 2 firsts? But I think that's the type of hardball that they are. Ken Carter, how would Norm Powell be on this team? He'd be great. He'd be arguably their third best player, right? I mean, probably based on the season he's had, probably their third best player. But I think Austin would handle the ball more. But he'd probably be their third best. King Carter, Jovan, what's your take on super teams? Do you think today's game is more leaning towards great role players who could step up around 2 stars? Yes, I think we've seen that shift throughout recent NBA history in terms of most teams, with the exception of even Denver. It was like Bruce Brown and Jeff Green. Like Denver only went 7, but really most teams go like 7 to 8 deep in terms of championship teams with like quality two-way role players. So I think ideally you could have 3 stars and like awesome role players, but it's hard to keep those guys, and it's hard to draft. It's hard to draft and keep those guys, but it's also hard to identify them. Like I think a team like Miami has done a pretty good job of finding a Haywood Highsmith, finding a Duncan Robinson, finding a Max Strus, finding those types of guys that are, second round picks, undrafted guys, underappreciated guys, undervalued guys. Lakers have had their fair share of success too. I think the Clippers do a good job of it as well, but like you need a mix. You can't be too star heavy, as we've seen with the Lakers with Russ, with the Suns, with the Nets. Although the Nets got pretty close there, obviously, with the whole KD toe situation. But I think the better setup is 2 stars in depth versus like 3 stars and no depth. Dane, thank you for the super chat. I don't see a question, so if it's just a super chat, I appreciate it. Alvin, thank you as well. Miles. Jovan, if you had to choose a route, would you go higher salary guard and lower salary big? Example, Bruce or Lonzo and Daron Sharp, or a higher salary big and a cheaper guard? Example, Vucevic and Davion. Between the two examples that you mentioned, I would lean the first one. I think uh, blanket answer, I do lean more ball handling and wing situation being a bigger need than backup big. Now, clearly Anthony Davis doesn't agree, and he's putting pressure on that. So I assume again that they're probably going to try and get a solid contributing big. But between these two, my Vucevic, I've said countless times, like I just think he's so bad defensively. I've been watching some film on him, and it's like, dude is a statue, and he does like these weird, like he's kind of like he almost like moves his arms, and I even so I'm trying to like kick dribbles and stuff because like he just can't keep guys in front of him, and that like yes is a bigger like it's you're adding a big 7-foot like warm body, but that guy, if that guy can't defend, like I think Jackson's a better defender than Vucevic, which again speaks to what I think of Vucevic's defense. Between these two, I think the first combination. Although with Davion, I like Davion, and Lakers might eventually have their own Davion in Bronny, though it seems like he's trending actually more in the offensive direction than defensive. But I just think he's too small. It's kind of similar to Gabe, and I think he actually might be smaller than Gabe. That they're pretty close. I think Bruce and Lonzo gives you a bigger ball handler for the bench, and then Daron, I think I like is an underrated guy who, yeah, like I think would check to me more of a box than like Davion would in the backcourt, because you're not really adding playmaking there. You're adding like a little bit, but you're more adding like another good defensive guard, which is nice. But I think if you add a defender, it should either be a wing or a center. Seeing some Kessler people saying give up both firsts. Aaron says Rob Williams for seconds and trade the first for Cam Johnson. Check ball. I like both of those moves. I don't know if Portland does just 2 seconds, but Kane Carter, Jovan, are teams known to do trades during road trips, or do they wait for them to return home? Just depends on finding a deal. Like I can say when I was covering the Clippers, they had the Grammy trip too, right? Because they were back then at Staples. And actually our last game of the trip was, or maybe second to last. I think we might have actually been going to Philly. It's funny, Charlotte, Philly, kind of how this all works. I don't remember. It was either we were in Charlotte. I don't remember if it was the last game of the trip or the second to last game of the trip. I think it might have been second to last, but and with Philly being the last, which again is funny. But the Clippers did the Tobias Harris trade to Philly, and along with Boban, and that trade dropped at 2 a.m. Eastern time. So I was done writing with my story. I was like winding down, and all of a sudden my phone starts blowing up, and it's like the Clippers just made this trade. And again, it's either the last or second to last game of the road trip. And I'm like, it changed my whole night. I'd pulled an all-nighter. I was calling people, texting people, writing all night for the morning. I think I finished at, it actually might have been a back-to-back in Philly, the more I'm remembering it, because I finished at like 6 or 7 a.m. and then I had to take a flight. And I think I was flying directly to Philly because it was a back-to-back. So he wasn't available. It was kind of crazy because they were going to Philly. So like he was already going to Philly and then they got traded there. But yeah, so it does happen on the road. I would say for the Lakers, like they're at home against the Warriors on the 6th, which is the deadline. So, and they come back on the 2nd. So it might, I would say realistically they make another trade in LA, but you never know. Eeg, thank you for the super chat. You might have hinted at it before. Def don't want you aggregated, but blink twice if you think the LeBron Lakers relationship is contentious at the moment, or don't, because F aggregators. I will respectfully not answer this question. Make of that what you will. L.A. Yo-Yo Jovan, will Vando rest tomorrow? And do you think Philly will make the French guy available? Do you like him over Rui? Use Rui for a trade. You're saying Yabusele? I don't know if Yabusele is available. JJ made it sound like Vando's playing tomorrow, so I would operate under that. Again, we'll have a better idea, I think 12 p.m. Eastern, somewhere around then. I'm my mark. Have we cooled down on Vooch, Pirtle, and Jonas? I talked about this a little bit ago, but just quickly, Vooch, I can't confirm. I've heard similarly that Mark Stein reported. Pirtle, I have not heard, but I trust Mark. He's one of the best in the business. And then Jonas, I've been saying that for like a month, that I've been hearing they've been cooling on him, but that continues to be what I hear. Doesn't mean between the three, I would say Jonas is probably the most realistic because of the salary and because of the prior interest from LeBron and AD specifically with him. But to your question, like, I think all three of those guys are less likely than they previously might have seemed. Though this is also smokescreen season, so maybe they put the smokescreen in the trade for one. But that's what I've heard outside the Lakers and around the team. But we'll see. Okay, I'm going to wrap here. I went 30 minutes over, as tends to happen, but I appreciate you all. Shout out to the late night gang for staying up with me a little bit earlier than normal. This is currently about 9:30 Pacific time, so one of the benefits of being on the East Coast for road trips is technically go a little bit earlier. But shout out to everyone. Shout out to Brandon, no username, Tally, J Note. Appreciate you all for the support. Appreciate you all for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications so you never miss a live or a new episode of Buha's Block. And make sure you like and comment on this stream. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back in less than 24 hours with a new stream reacting to the Lakers-Sixers game. This is a game Lakers should win. No Paul George, no Joel Embiid, and probably no other players. Like, Philly is super banged up. Second night of a back-to-back is always tough, especially on the road, but LA should win that one. But either way, I'll be back to cover it, and I will talk to you guys very soon.